Just to repeat, if the senator had not invited me, I would have volunteered to come. Mainly because many, many years ago, starting in 1989, I was already part of a group composed of your father, very good friend, Nene Pimentel, Pepe Abueva, our UP president, and several others who went around the whole archipelago doing political education. Why did I say it was political education? Because we were not really like advocating federal and parliamentary system. We were really laying down the groundwork for a future referendum when the population would be asked in regard to constitutional changes. And so whenever we have these interactions, I would always be the curtain raiser, the first one to introduce the subject area on federalism and parliamentary systems. So what you really need to realize is that a democracy can only work because you have informed citizenry. After all the government authorities come from the people. And I think that is enshrined in our constitution. So anything that the people grants to the government, it can also take away. That is the reason why you have recall, you have impeachment, and the like. So that even if you had been elected by X number of votes, there are also mechanisms by which you may be not elected anymore. And that brings us to the question of why are we revising our constitution? Well, the quick and dirty answer there, I use the term quick and dirty because it's the one we use as social scientist, senator, to mean that we had very little time and therefore I have to truncate my responses. I know I can deliver a whole session here of my lecture, but I know that there are many other resource persons. And I hope you will invite me another time so we can continue this conversation on many, many aspects of the changes that you want undertaken. Structures are very important. Structures are really the institutions within which you envelope or you embrace individuals and groups, and the structures will define the limits to action. They will define the floor and they will define the ceiling, the bottom and the top, so that an individual, when given a particular structure, like if this were a glass, the individual knows that it can only work within the structure of the glass, like this cylinder. Like, you talk of the leche flan, which can be formed in different configuration. If you form it in an oblong, the milk and the sugar will only work along the edges of the oblong or whatever shape the leche flan will take. That is the nature of structure. Now, if you put warm bodies in structure, then the warm bodies will have to align within the structure. And when they so align within the structure, you invariably change their behavior. So the basic groundwork, Senator, of the changes that you want would really be this philosophical perspective that structures will result in behavior change. That's the reason why we're revising the Constitution. Because what you have seen from 1987 is that there have been a lot of things that we have done and not done, and we think that a change is in order. And the change can only come from changing the relationship among structures. And I think you hit on one of the major relationship, and that is between the executive and the legislature. Now, people seem to get confused in regard to federal and parliamentary systems. I think you mentioned that already, Senator Pimentel. When you talk of federal systems, you really talk of the relationship between the national government and the subnational units. So when you talk of a parliamentary system, you're talking about the relationship between the executive and the legislature. Okay, what is the difference between a presidential system and a parliamentary system? Siguro, konting kasaysayan. Nag-umpisa ang parliamentary system sa tinatawag na Mother of Parliament, Great Britain. Nagkaroon sila ng bloodless revolution in 1688, where once upon a time, it was the king who declared the law. And I'm sure you remember the divine rights of kings, Senator Robin. The divine rights of kings simply declares that the kings represent God, and therefore, whatever the king says is law. But they had this glorious revolution, and so they constituted what is called the parliament. The word parliament comes from the French term parler, P-A-R-L-E-R, which means to talk. That's why parliament is a talking environment. You talk. Uh, if you zipper your mouth there, I mean, you'll be ousted in the next election because everybody, that's why no bobo can be member of parliament, by the way. I'm sorry for the use of the word, but I cannot find any other one which is appropriate. Meaning somebody who has nothing between his ears will eventually be kicked out of the parliament because he will not be able to converse, he will not be able to exchange views, he will not be able to sustain the question hour, which will happen. I think you mentioned that a while back, because in the question hour, every member of the parliament will be asked, what have you done in agriculture? What have you done in health services? And the like, and will be made accountable for what he has or has not done. So, you know, the beauty of this is just starting to unravel. And I wish this will be a continuing conversation, Senator, so that, you know, this will require many, many sessions, I assure you, because I'm just truncating my thoughts now. I'm putting them all together, and then maybe later on, I will spell them out in more detail, if not in this session, in some other sessions. All right. What is the other outstanding quality of a parliamentary system? The fundamental principle is parliament is supreme, which means whatever the parliament declares is law. Of course, if you have a dual executive, then the executive, who is a ceremonial executive, will give his or her imprimatur, but as only pro forma. You recall Queen Elizabeth? Queen Elizabeth will dare not give the royal assent. It is given as a matter of course because it's been taken away from the royals. They are just there for, oh, I don't know, maybe for decoration, you know, and to for us to gossip about, no, and find out what dresses they're wearing. But if in a parliamentary system, you will have two executives, the one who will be there when your prime minister is kicked out of office and when the government of the day is not there, and therefore you have a president there who will be the bridge towards the next government of the day. I will expand on this later because I have limited time. But yes, Parliament declares today, the next Parliament can repeal. That is how powerful the Parliament is. That is the essence, that is the vortex of the principle of Parliament is supreme. So, any law can be repealed at a later time. Do you recall Great Britain getting out of the European Union? That was a decision of the Conservative Party. The Conservative Party went to the people and said, if you elect the Conservative Party members, we are going to get Britain out of the EU. And the people voted the Conservative Party members. Did they vote for Theresa May, who was the Prime Minister at the time, or Boris Johnson as Premier? No, they voted for these two people as members of Parliament. It only happened that both Theresa May and Boris Johnson were leaders of their political party. And when they constituted the majority in the parliament, the leader became the premier. That goes for every other parliamentary system. Whoever is the head of the majority party or a coalition of politics becomes the premier. And the premier is the head of government. The president is the chief of state. All right. The other pluses of parliamentary system, and has been noted by Senator Padilla, is that there is a fusion of the executive and the legislature. You are not electing an executive because the prime minister will elect from among the majority party members the heads of his cabinet. If you'll notice, if you've been to Great Britain, or if you have seen it, you know, as they are being videoed, you'll notice that the configuration is something like this, although the walkway is a little bit bigger, maybe double this. That's the reason why there is a term called crossing the aisle, isn't it? Because that is the aisle. If you cross the aisle, you actually change your political color. So let us assume the speaker is there. Whoever is seated to the right of the speaker is the government of the day. You are the premier. I am the shadow government. I am the head of the minority party. At any time you are ousted, we will exchange places. And let us say Senator Pimentel is seated there as the head of housing. Opposite from him would be Professor Monsod, who will be the housing minister even when your government is ousted. Do you see, even just looking at the parliament in a process, you already have a story there, isn't it? A lot of stories there. The concept of rightists and leftists came from that. Whoever is in the right of the speaker wants to keep the status quo. You want to be the government of the day. The one who is on the left of the speaker wants to change the status quo. We are the shadow government. I want to change you. I want to be the next premier. So, all right. What is the other beautiful part about parliamentary system? There will be no notion of term limits. If you're elected as a member of parliament, you can be elected for as long as you are alive or can continue to discourse in parliament. And you're elected by your electoral district, by the way. If you do not perform, of course, the next time you are not elected. And the best part about that is you don't even need to spend for your election because it is the political party to which you will plug your umbilical cord because it will pay for your campaign expenses, your radio and TV time. But beware, if Eric here is a member of the political party, I'll tell him, Eric, ha, bayaran ko yung campaign expenses mo, ha, and radio and TV time mo. Pero kuidaw ka, whenever you are in parliament, you got to toe the party line. Which means, if we are, let us say, against abortion, dapat against abortion tayo. Yun ang party line. Kung hindi, tumiwalag ka sa party. Do you see? Party discipline. Kasi hawak ko na siya, ako nagasto sa kanya. Okay. And the other better part of this election is that we're not going through a very torturous, ano ba yun? Parang 3 months na election na naubos na yung salapi mo, hindi pa matapos yung campaign. The usual campaign period is only 2 weeks. After the parliament is dissolved, within 10 to 12 days, meron ka ng bagong parliament. Because you only go to the electoral district and you campaign on the electoral district. You are not campaigning in the whole Great Britain and Northern Ireland. You are campaigning only in your electoral district. So you don't need 3 months to do that. No term limits. There will be no, even political dynasties will be irrelevant. Why? You have political dynasties, and the empirical evidence supports me here. Orion, are you there? I'm sure you can say more about that later. But the reason why you have political dynasties is because you have term limits. You told people that ikaw ganitong taon ka lang pwedeng elect. Sabihin, ang ganda sana ng gagawin ko. Itong kapatid ko si Eric, siya na nga ang aking sunod na mag-elect, no? Mag-campaign. At marami na akong naitanim na mga magagandang mga proyekto. Siyempre, Eric is more likely to be elected. Not so much because we have the same surname, Carlos, but because he just followed through what I earlier started. Why will there be no political dynasties? Which is so antithetical, by the way, to democracy. Because you can only be elected by the electoral district. Never mind that your surname is the same as mine. Do you see? These are really the things that we have to think about. And I think if we're talking about strategic communication, Senator Padilla, this is how we should sell it. No term limits, no political dynasties. These are irrelevant issues in a parliamentary system. Okay, well, I don't know how much more I can go deeply on this, but do I have the time?
Opo.
Okay, all right. What else does the parliamentary system require? It needs a very, very strong bureaucracy. That is the reason why in parliamentary systems, you have what is called permanent secretaries, because it's not the case here where when you have a change of administration, you change everybody up to director. Do you know, I wrote a book, by the way, Senator Padilla, on bureaucratic reform. I'll give you copies, no? Sorry sa commercial, ha? Pero doon, nakita ko ang presidente will appoint upwards of 5,000 positions. I'm sure, Senator Pimentel and Padilla, you know that Mag-choose nga lang tayo ng 10, nahihirapan tayo. Isipin mo, 5,000 yung papakailaman mo every time there is a change in administration. And that's now it's not going to be. In a parliamentary system, only the head of the department, only the head of the ministry will change. And there will be continuing policy because the permanent secretaries will be the ones that will continue the policy. And it's only the direction that the head of the ministry that will direct. Do you see the beauty of all this? The bureaucracy is king in a parliamentary system. That's why when you talk about implementation, never mind that the cabinet secretaries are changing, it's really the bureaucracy under them who will continue under the continuing rules of the game or the rules of, well, the rules of the civil service or the rules of the bureaucracy. So when we adopt the parliamentary system, all these concomitants we really have to put in together. You cannot adopt them like fragmented, like with all due respect, you cannot revise the Constitution piece by piece or fragmented. Let's talk of the Constitution like an organism, like a human body. Meron siyang sakit sa kanyang puso, may sakit siya sa kanyang kidney. Wag lang yun ang pakailaman mo. Alaman mo lahat kasi infirmed siya eh. Kasi yung puso niya at saka yung kidney niya, meron siyang relationship, di ba? So hindi mo pwedeng galawin yung economic provisions kasi yung economic provisions, nakatukod siya sa political and social provisions. Hindi ba? So hindi siya pwedeng stand alone. Papalitan mo yung economic. Tapos yung iba hindi mo siya papakailaman. When we are going to revise the Constitution, dapat omnibus ang revision mo. Kasi bawat section doon na papalitan mo, ay meron siya mga pinsan sa other sections. Mag-move lahat siya eh. They will all be moving parts. So I'm sorry, I apologize if I go against the notion that you can in fact revise the Constitution piecemeal. You can't. Otherwise, we will be wasting our time. And some other time, we will again revise the Constitution. And we don't like to do that. You know, revising the Constitution is not like suddenly, you know, we scratch our head. Sa ligang batas po natin yan. It's the basic law of the land. It is not revised willy-nilly. It's not as if, you know, ganito yung capriccio natin ngayon, we change it. No, we don't. We're changing it because we want a structural change. We want a structural change because we want behavior change. I think I shall conclude at that point. Thank you.
Maraming salamat po sa aming kalihim. Napakaganda po ng inyong pagpapaliwanag, lalong-lalo na po doon sa usapin na magkaharap na yung dalawa. Hindi po nagtataguan. Napakaganda po nun. Kasi yun po ang gusto ng ating mga kababayan na gusto nila, marinig nila na sa bibig mismo ng mga pinuno nila kung ano yung mga plano nila ng harapan. Hindi po pwede na dadaan pa muna sa media, kanya-kanya munang pagalingan sa media, kanya-kanyang banatan doon, pero hindi naman sila nagkakaharap. Napakaganda po talaga noong harapan na nandiyan yung shadow government, nandoon yung ruling, sige, banatan kayo dyan. Yun po sana ang gusto natin na mangyari para yung ating mga kababayan ay hindi nangangapa. Tungkol naman po doon sa...
may I immediately react to that? Okay, that's a very good point. Because during the question hour, the Prime Minister, in fact, together with government of the day, we say government of the day because at any day they can be ousted. That's the reason why we use that term. The government, in fact, can stake the life of his government on a question of policy. Policy X, for example, no? And when he stakes the life of his government on a question of policy and he does not get the vote, he will be ousted. That's one other great part about parliamentary system.
Opo, ibig niyo pong sabihin, hindi kailangan ng people power.
No, you don't need people. You just oust him. But, you know, Senator, when
Kasi nagkaroon na po ng addiction yata ang Pilipino sa people power. Lagi na lang, punta tayo sa EDSA. Marami lang tayo ng tao dyan. Sa parliamentary po, hindi na po kailangan yan.
Mayroon po nung role ang rally sa ating liberal democracy. Pero wag ho natin sa kalye gawin ang ating ang mga pagbabago.
Maraming salamat po. Ngayon po, baka may gusto pong...
Umaabot lang naman sa kalye kasi yung protesta pag walang structure na dadaanan kasi yung grievance yung hinaing ng taong bayan eh. In a parliamentary system, nandun yung structure. May grievance kami, may hinanakit kami sa legislatura, sa parliament. Yung aming problema sa ngayon, hindi nila binibigyan ng tamang atensyon o tamang kilos. Palitan natin sa eleksyon. So, pipressure namin ang aming member of parliament to siguro a vote of no confidence para to dissolve the leadership in the parliament, mapipilitan to call an election. And then hopefully the election will reflect, makita ng election yung sentimiento ng taong bayan. Kaya importante rin na clean and honest elections dapat. So tignan natin yung mga bansang yon na talagang pinatibay na nila yung electoral system nila, pinagkakatiwalaan nila ron at saka walang insentibong mandaya ron because yung taong bayan na mismo ang susuka ka o mandaraya ka sa eleksyon or you will be ostracized and forever remembered. So, sanctity yun. Kasi yun ang paraan eh. O, yun ang paraan ng pagbabago eh. So, yun po yun. So, para sa akin, yung parliamentary system reflects the needs of the society at the present time eh. Kasi kung hindi mo sinasagot yun, you do not belong to parliament. You will be ousted in an honest election reflecting the will of the people. Kaya yung mga patago-tago na member of the cabinet or of the government, magiging permanente na yung pagtatago nila kasi hindi na sila magiging member of the government. They will be ousted, yun nga sabi, through an election reflecting the will of the people. Yun po. So marami po itong marami talagang kailangan natin, pagbabagong kailangan gawin. Tapos yun na, since posible yung government of the day matanggal at any time, kailangan may matibay pa rin yung gobyernong naiwan. Kasi meron yatang possibility, Secretary, na there's a period of time that there is no government of the day formed yet, ganon. So,
that's the reason why you have the ceremonial president to bridge over.
Yes, so that's why matibay yung bureaucracy. Kasi even without a head to give the direction for the moment, tuloy ang gobyerno, existing ang gobyerno. So these are many features, Mr. Chairman, na pagandaan talaga natin lahat ng mga yan. So thank you po, thank you.
Napakaganda po. Kasi kakapangyari lang po niyan sa UK na kailan lang kay Boris Johnson ba? Boris, di ba? Na nagkaroon sila ng eleksyon, nanalo nga siya, pero ang nangyari, tinatanggal siya pinag-resign siya dahil medyo may mga iskandalo siyang ginawa, COVID, pero tumutoma-toma siya, nagalit ang tao pinag-resign siya, nag-eleksyon. Nanalo pa rin siya. Pero nangyari, yung kanyang mga minister nag-resign. Wala siyang nagawa. Natanggal siya, palit siya.
If you will notice there, despite the fact that they ousted Boris Johnson, still the Conservative Party controlled the majority in the House of Commons. And therefore, they chose among themselves the next leader. No? But if the majority party loses its majority, we're talking arithmetic majority, no? Then they go to the country and have an election. Yeah.
Yun ang maganda Sige po, Senator.
Yun po yun. So, kung nakita natin, change is is easier to achieve under a parliamentary system. So, the party controlling the majority of the parliament made a change within. So internal, nagawa nila, bago. Kasi yung face nila, ayaw na ng tao. Let's say it's masyadong too costly for the party to maintain that face of the party. Palitan, internal. Tapos sinasabi nga sa atin ni Secretary Carlos, kung kailangan silang palitan yung mismong majority, kaya rin. Because bakit papalitan? Nagbago ang sentimiento ng electorate. Hindi na kayo ang representative, the tamang representative sa panahon na ito. Maybe sa last election, totoo. Nagbago. So nagbago ang sentimiento namin, papalitan. So, ganun po. So, I mean, napakaganda if we are after a structure which will allow changes in the government to be made easier because the structures make it possible. So, napakaganda. And then kung ganyan nga, you're a member of parliament, you're the persons running the government, parati kang on your toes. So pati yung change in behavior nga sinasabi ni Secretary Carlos, on your toes, hindi yung katulad kahapon na na-atake ni Senator Villar na ang tamad nyo, ayaw nyo magtrabaho. O, gano'n. So, change of behavior on your toes parati. Di ba? Kasi kahapon, ma'am, ang excuse na nabibigay, we are a member of the board. The board, this is the board decision. We need approvals, two to three levels of approvals. Ganun yung kahapon na excuses na nabibigay. So, ano to you are not on your toes. In effect, kung tutuusin, the whole structure is not on your toes kasi you can turo you can ipasa mo yung bola pasa mo yung blame which is also lumalabas doon sa ating blue ribbon kay Senator Tolentino na excuses din, pasa rin ng bola. Gusto nga niya manood daw ng Gilas, nag-investigate siya ng blue ribbon, nakapanood din siya ng basketball game. Kasi anong napanood niya? Puro assist, pasa bola. The blame game, the pointing, the finger pointing, gano'n nangyayari. Unlike in a parliamentary system, kung mapagod na ang taong bayan, pagod na kami sa passing the ball nyo, pagod na kami sa finger pointing ninyo, palitan na lang yung party in power with a new party because they are disorganized or whatever. So, ganun po yun. So I really want to pursue all this parliamentary system of government because it might baka mas angkop na sa panahon sa panahon na lalo na ngayon na ang bilis ng pagbabago
Yes.
Technology,
Yes.
even science so economic policies iba na mga economic theories ngayon wala pa bago-bago na so we can react siguro more quickly if we adopt a parliamentary system of government. So, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Napakalinaw po ng pagpapaliwanag
Mr.
ng
Chairman.
ating
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Pimentel. Nagtataas po ng kamay si Senator Tolentino. Senator Tolentino.
Opo, first I'd like to congratulate Professor Carlos for that very substantial statements made a while ago. Secretary Carlos and I have known each other for years, hindi naman siguro decades. And I congratulate her for elucidating some items that should have been at the forefront of national discussions years ago. Mr. Chairman, allow me to quote something that I stumbled upon. I was there during the National Heroes Day celebration in La Union a week ago or last Monday. And it so happened that one of the greatest sons of La Union is a former Senator Camilo Osias from La Union. And Camilo Osias, in February 2, 1962, made the same assertion like what our chairman is saying, or even Senator Pimentel. And if I'd like to have this recorded again for the second time, and I quote, Mr. Chairman, if you'll allow me, Senator Primicias had a privileged speech in 1962, and the gist is this: what kind of government should we have? The question was answered by the Malolos Convention when they included in the preamble of that document, and I quote from memory, this is from Senator Osias, I was not yet born then, el gobierno de la república es popular, representativo, alternativo, y responsable. These adjectives used in that phraseology need not be explained. We know what a gobierno popular should be, namely one rooted in the will of the people. We are operating under that ideology. And we also know we are operating under that ideology. And we also know that a government should be responsible. Mr. President, this is Senator Osias. there is one adjective used in that constitution which I think, as far as I know, is not found in any other written constitution of the entire world. I refer to the adjective alternativo. There are no written precedents or jurisprudence on this matter. We can only imagine that those fathers of the Malolos Constitution did envision, and I dare say that they included that adjective as a rebellion against hereditary monarchy, wherein the son of a king or emperor, merely in virtue of accident of birth, may ascend to the throne upon the death of the occupant of that monarchical government. I believe, against Senator Sias, that it was an expression of the conviction of the Filipino people that there must be periodic change. Ito po yung sinasabi ni Senator Pimentel kanina. There must be periodic change. Turnuhan in the national language. A government nga masukat-sukat in the Ilocano language. Now we are operating under that. That was during the time of the speech of Senator Primicias. Mr. President, I think the proceedings today is very timely because during that period, they talk about the upper house and the lower house called Cámara Alta and Cámara Baja. It should have been in one building where the upper house would be located, the Senate would be located in the upper floor, the Cámara Baja would be located in the lower floor. But then again, Mr. President, after 1962, this speech of Senator Osias still would reverberate in the memory of historians because we're now talking of parliamentary federalism, and these are all very timely, especially with the explanation given a while ago by my former professor, Professor Secretary Carlos, and I hope the discussion would be elevated nationally to a level beyond partisan politics, and even a discussion that should include the grassroots level. So, Mr. Chairman, though I was absent last time, I would be a participant in your committee hearings virtually and perhaps later on physically. Maraming salamat po, Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me po, sir.
Maraming salamat po ating Vice Chairman sa ating Senator Francis Tolentino. Meron lang po ako, napakaganda po nung sinabi nyo, no? 1962. Alam niyo po, senador po yan eh. Sigurado po ako yung sinasabi nilang pagbabago na yan kasi nung 1971 kasama po ang ama ng ating Senator Coco Pimentel. Gumawa po sila noong 1973 Constitution. Parliament na po yun eh. So nakita natin na talagang yung sinasabi nyo na dumadating talaga yung panahon na kailangan magpalit ng tumatakbo ang panahon eh. Kailangan nag-a-adjust. Sabi nga ni Senator Coco, dapat nag-a-adjust talaga. Ngayon po, pakinggan lang po natin. Sige po.
For the record ko lang ha. Although member yung father ko sa 1971 Constitutional Convention, he did not vote for the draft. He refused to vote because of what happened, the subsequent happenings. Kasi may mga pressure doon, alam mo na, may mga bombing pa nga doon eh. Sa Quezon City Hall yata yun, sa comfort room. So may mga subsequent events which pressure delegates, mga ganun. So ang ending po noon, my father refused to vote for that draft.
Matuloy po kasi yung panahon na yan, 1971, wala pang martial law nun eh. Na-approve po ang 1973 na yung Constitution na approved. Martial law na. Kaya nagkaroon na ng maraming...
ang pagpapatawag si Secretary Carlos will correct me if I'm wrong. Ang election sa CONCON, wala pang martial law. But then CONCON pa rin, there was still a CONCON, there was a declaration of martial law. Am I correct, Secretary Carlos? Yes. Yes, yeah.
Time.
Yes, ganun yun. So,
Ano pa sila eh, nagkakadimandahan pa sila noon.
so yun po na yun. So, imagine niyo na lang when you are now asked to vote for a draft, and then it was under a martial law situation. So maraming influences po, which may not be maraming influences sa decision mo which may not be connected to the merit of the draft, di ba? So yun po yung gusto kong sabihin. Okay. Salamat po.
Okay, maraming salamat po, Senator Pimentel. Meron
Mr.
pong
Chairman?
gustong magdagdag si Ma'am...
Ako po, sir. Kanina pa po ako.
Sandali lang po, sandali lang po. Apo. Ma'am Sulita Munsod. Ma'am, kayo pala yan. Kanina kasi Ma'am, kamusta po? Long time no see. Opo, salamat po at
kasi merong mga ebidensya, studies have been made, and this is hard evidence. Alam niyo ba that only two countries, the period from 1962 to 1998, only two countries changed their form of government. There was Cyprus in 1970 and Sri Lanka in 1978, because it's very hard. And both of them shifted from parliamentary to presidential. That is the situation. Now,
I have a rebuttal to that.
I don't have
sandali lang po.
that is a fact.
Mr. Orion,
I have a
sandali lang
I have
po.
a solid
Tatawagin
rebuttal
po
to
kayo. Please lang po.
I'm not putting in an argument.
Sir Orion, please po. Makikiusap lang po sa inyo ang committee. Always address the chairman.
That is a fact. I mean, please. All right. Okay.
Mr. Chairman,
No, I'm just trying to give the empirical findings.
Mr. Chairman,
This is
may I-
not subject to argumentation. This is a fact. If you
Mr.
don't want me
Chairman,
to
point
give
of
you
order.
facts,
Mr.
no
Chairman, point of
problem.
order. At least we should allow Ms. Monsod to finish her statement before any other resource person can butt in. That's
Yes,
what-
yes, Vice Chairman. Opo, maraming salamat po. Tuloy po, ma'am. Opo.
I'm trying to get back. I'm sorry. I've lost it.
Habang hinahanap niyo po,
Yeah.
ma'am, magkukwentuhan lang po kami ni Senator Coco Pimentel dahil napakaganda po nung topic na pinag-uusapan natin. Noon pa lang kasi nakikita mo na talaga, no, Senator, talagang meron talagang need for change. Kasi 1935 Constitution, naging 1973, tapos naging hindi bago yung pagpapalit ng konstitusyon no?
Hindi, tsaka ito lang po Mr. Chairman.
I've got
Hindi,
it.
the mere fact na merong article sa Constitution na on how to change it, how to amend it. Ganun po yun. We really need to be flexible. Flexibility is the name of the game. Ngayon, our 1987 Constitution, because of the structures nga linagay doon, naging rigid tuloy. Although theoretically, andun yung way to amend it, pero imperfectly phrased yata yun na pagdating sa usapin tuloy sa constitutional change, imbis na sa merit tayo nung substance, ano ba yung babaguhin, oras natin divert sa paano babaguhin. Ayun. So kaya kaya nga ang trap, yan ang trap. Wag tayong bumagsak sa trap na yon. Merito ng proposal sa ating i-discuss. Then pagka maganda na yung meron na tayong conclusion na maganda at meron tayong consensus, di ko sinasabing unanimity, but merong suporta ito sa majority. saka natapos natin pag-usapan yung paano ba babaguhin. Kasi dinadivert tayo eh. Yung oras ubos doon sa paano, hindi napapag-usapan tuloy yung magagandang proposal. Ayusin na muna natin itong substance before procedure or process.
Maraming salamat po, Senator Pimentel. Ma'am?
Yeah.
Opo.
Now, with respect to the form of government and corruption, ang mga studies, there are ambiguous, conflicting. There's one study where it says that the evidence supports that the theoretical finding that accountability is stronger. In other words, corruption and rent seeking is less in presidential than in parliamentary. But that only happens when the quality of the democracy is good. If it is bad, that does not hold. Measured by the constraints on the, what about other studies? Lederman in 2005 said parliamentary systems are associated with lower corruption. So one says presidential is with higher corruption, parliamentary is lower corruption. The finding supports the theory, of course. Now, the form of government and democratic survivability. One study, Stepan and Skak says parliamentary democracies had a high rate of survival, more than 3 times higher than that of a presidential democracy. Presidential democracies were more than twice as likely to have pure parliamentary democracies to experience a military coup. And not one presidential regime managed to survive as a democracy for 10 consecutive years from 1980 to 1989, while 15 of the 41 parliamentary systems did. However, that study was criticized severely by another study which said that no evidence that constitutional type has had any significant bearing on the success of third world experiments in democracy. And there is no statistically significant difference between breakdown rates of presidential and parliamentary. In fact, the selection of successful parliamentary democracies was biased against Latin America in favor of Africa. So here are studies done empirically to test the experience of these forms of democracies, and this is their findings. Now, there is this is an empirical finding on the form of the government and government spending. Parliamentary democracies have larger government spending. The shift from parliamentary to presidential would reduce the total size of government spending by about 5% of GDP in the long run. Spending also grows much faster in parliamentary forms, and this is according to Person and Tabellini. More on government spending. A new majoritarian and presidential democracy cuts government consumption by almost 2%, while a new parliamentary democracy raises it considerably. The difference between the two forms of government is highly significant. Meaning to say, that difference is not zero. Now, with respect to, this is more empirical evidence with respect to form of government and structural reforms, defined as openness, protection of property rights. And the studies show that there is a large and significant correlation between parliamentary proportional democracy and structural reforms. There is significant, and another study says that there is significant correlation between parliamentary systems and openness. But with respect to the government and economic performance, the form of government and economic performance, there is no significant effect of parliamentary system on economic performance as measured by per capita GDP, total factor productivity, and labor productivity. That is one study. And another study says a new parliamentary democracy grows 1.5% less than a new presidential democracy. These are the these are the empirical facts that come out of studies. So, in summary, there is conflicting empirical evidence as to which form of government will lead to lower corruption. That is, there is conflicting evidence as to whether constitutional type has any significant bearing on the survival of democracies. But the evidence is pretty strong that presidential regimes have smaller spending, meaning to say government spending as a percentage of GDP than parliamentary regimes. And a parliamentary system is systematically correlated with structural policies. But a parliamentary system has no significant effect on economic performance. And the sixth takeaway here is a new presidential system grows faster than a new parliamentary system. This all come from studies. No, no argument on my side. These are what comes out. Right?
Okay, sige po.
Just a
Senator.
question. Were those conclusions your conclusions or conclusions of a study?
No, these are the studies.
Study. Sige.
Yes, I
So
think
we-
these are.
So around six, no? Six
Oh, no, they are not
major.
my conclusions.
Okay,
not
that
at
you
all.
just read the study. So nakuha ba ng stenographer natin yung yung
Opo.
the name of the study so we can
These are several studies. These are a whole.
several studies
these are several
but you
studies.
listed the six conclusions.
From those several studies.
Yes, from those several
Yes.
studies. So thank you for
Just summarize.
yes, thank you for summarizing the studies for us. Yun lang yung kinaklaro ko. Salamat po.
Maraming salamat. Tapos na po kayo?
Yes.
Apo, meron lang pong sasabihin si Secretary Clarita Carlos.
Yes, thank you very much. I would like to compliment my colleague, Professor Monsod. We're colleagues at the University of the Philippines. I at the Department of Political Science and Professor Monsod at the School of Economics. I complimented her because she presented empirical evidence, which were done by social scientists in regard to which type of structure would enable us to reach the desired result. There is no doubt that if you will notice, some of them are conflicting results. Yes, and as it should be, as is in the nature of social science research. Mainly because social scientists, including economists who are social scientists, use different variables to test, and they also have different levels of confidence when they test. And so when Professor Monsod talks about no statistical difference, it simply means that whatever difference that you're seeing is happening by chance. But when she says that there is a very high correlate, that means that they are moving in certain kinds of direction, which in fact are related to each other. This would be for the benefit of those provide you another assumptive framework, which is that every political system is unique. While it is true that we're able to detect patterns among them, it's not always the case that countries are comparable because they're mostly not. Even social scientists, when we even investigate the same issue area, we in fact are investigating it in a different way because we are weighing the variables with different potencies, and that already changes the conceptual framework. So I agree, let us listen to the empirical evidence and let us listen to colliding evidence also pertinent to this. That's the reason why in advance of this session, Senator Padilla, remember I was telling you, let us look at the pluses and the minuses, but I still argue there will be more pluses for parliamentary systems. Thank you.
Meron po kayong gustong idagdag? Okay. Okay po. Study lang. Opo. Meron po tayong iwan muna po natin yung topic na yan. Puntahan muna po natin yung kung bakit po tayo nandito. Ito po ay patungkol sa resolusyon ng ginawa po ni Senator Win Gatchalian na ang gusto po niya ay magkaroon ng Constitutional Assembly at nagpo-propose po siya ng amendments sa restrictive economic provisions ng 1987 Constitution. Ito po ay nag-request po si Senator Win Gatchalian na gusto po niyang mahingi ang opinyon ng ating mga secretaries. Kaya po natin inimbitahan yung ating mga kalihim at tayo naman po ay sinuwerte at pinagpala na tayo po ay pinagdagdigyan ng ating kalihim sa national security, ang atin pong ginagalang na si Secretary Clarita Carlos. Ang tanong po ng ating senador, kung magkakaroon daw po ba ng epekto sa seguridad kung babaguhin po natin ang magkakaroon ng amenda sa konstitusyon patungkol po sa economic.
The answer is certainly yes. Mainly because when I came in as a national security advisor, I did not set aside the external threat, which is a source of our insecurity, but I stress as a political scientist the human security aspect. Therefore, whatever changes you want to make in regard to the 1987 Constitution, whether they are economic changes, whether they are political changes, etc., they will invariably link to how we enhance the security of the individual, food security, energy security, health security, security of your person. Anytime the government performs well, it redounds to the benefit of the individual, human security.
Ibig pong sabihin po ba, mahal naming kalihim, na kapag pumasok po, pinayagan natin ang mga dayuhan na magnegosyo dito, maaari po bang makaapekto ito sa seguridad ng ating bansa? Maaari po ba na sila ay maging threat sa atin?
Siguro mas marami yung hindi threat sa sa pagpumasok ang mga dayuhan, no? Kasi ito siguro yung sinusulong ng marami na alisin na yung 60-40 restriction. And ang mangyayari nito down the line is that, of course, the President of the Republic would like to create jobs, especially for 2 years talagang nilang paso tayo ng pandemic. So when they come in, they bring in capital, they bring in factories, manufacturing, innovation, they create jobs. You create jobs, somebody is paying for his amortization for a house, he has money to pay for the amortization of the house. Human security, you create jobs, they will put their children to school, education. We are educators here, Professor Mansod and I. That is in fact the nerve center of economic and political development. So yes, anything that we do to liberalize the environment within which work happens, within which our daily acts of living happens, redounds to the benefit of the individual.
Ang issue po yata kasi ay patungkol po sa telecommunication. Yun po yung number 1 na nire-raise nila, na kapag naibigay yung pag-aari sa dayuhan, baka yung atin pong, alam nyo na, dyan nag-uumpisa yung mga bagay-bagay na nakukuha nila, yung mga impormasyon. Yung po ba ay sa palagay po nyo pwede na maging threat po yun, yung telecommunication?
Well, I've always been an iconoclast, Senator Robin, so I don't think so, with all due respect. By the way, even if we think we are in fact secure, we're not secure, you know. I'm sure you know the capability of your telephones, and they can be intruded into and the like. Believe me, whoever gives us the, you know, the stronger, faster internet, he can come from Jupiter and I don't care. You know, because we're moving towards globalization. Economies are already meshed with each other. So do we care who owns what? You know, I think I care who gives the best service. And I really don't care who you are. Whether you're a corporate person or you are a corporation, you're an individual, you're a collective, whoever gives the best service. There is no socialist way of repairing a road, is there? Is there a democratic way of repairing a road? No, you just repair the road and it doesn't even have a label on it. I think we should be, I don't know, we should be realistic about these things. Why are we putting labels on everything and putting political color? The telcos want to come here, let them come here. You know, if the present telcos are not giving us the services that we want, we're one of the slowest telcos in the world. As I said, he can come from Saturn and I don't care.
Maraming salamat po. Sige po, Deputy Secretary Michael. Opo.
Well, Senator, you cannot prevent a determined actor if he wants to penetrate your communication, whether he is an owner or an outsider. I mean, we can talk about any other country with capabilities, and they may not own your telcos, and they could do something about your system. But what the problem with this kind of fear is that, first and foremost, there is no evidence that would support that, in fact, when you have the ownership by foreigners, is that it will automatically be a breach of our security, because some people would only want to do business and would not do something else. And we have to weigh the security implications and our desire to have better services, because the better services redounds later on to your ability to progress economically. And when we talk about the linkage between economic development and security, we have to always understand that economic and security, they are like double helix. Your ability to secure your nation is underpinned your ability to progress economically.
Ang ingay.
It also
Ingay ni
goes the
Gabi.
same way that your ability to progress also depends on your capability to secure your country. So it is not an either or thing. It is not one coming after the other. It is actually a double helix thing that you do not know where to begin, except that you know that they are interlinked. Now, when there are clear evidence that this equity requirement retard our nation. This is true in many sectors of our economy, in the telecommunication, in the shipping industry. I will give an example in the shipping industry. When you require equity ownership by Filipinos, once upon a time in the 70s, we have in our ships registry, in our marina, there were more than 1,500 ships registered under Philippine flag. Then in the 80s, it was reduced to 800. Now we have less than 150 ships. And what does it mean? That's the reason why you have your seafarers boarding foreign ships instead of Filipino ships, because instead of Filipino flag ships, because of many requirements that we are imposing. I mean, if I am the owner of the ship, for example, I am a German, of course, I would have to have some say on the decision making. If I don't have the decision making power, then I will not invest in your country.
Okay. Malinaw po na hindi po kayo kontra dito na magkaroon na tanggalin na itong 60-40. Sige, Senator.
Malinaw na hindi sila kontra at hindi sila worried. Hindi sila worried.
Okay po, tatanungin naman po natin ang ating mga bisita. Sige po.
Ano ba yun, Secretary? You're not even worried about it.
Let us say it's not a high threat.
Okay po, sa NEDA. Sino po ang pwedeng sumagot sa NEDA sapagkat kayo po ang ni-request ni Senator Win patungkol dito. Ito po ba ay makakatulong ang pag-aamyenda nitong batas na ito? Makakatulong po ba ito sa ating ekonomiya?
Marami pong salamat to the Honorable Chairman, Senator Robin, and the members of the committee, Senator De La Rosa, Senator Tolentino, Senator Pimentel. Magandang umaga po sa lahat. Now, on the matter concerning resolution of both houses, number 1, that has been supportive naman po. We support the objective envisioned in the proposed resolution, as this recognizes yung need for the country to adapt to the present and future socio-economic condition of the country. In recent past, Honorable Chair, NEDA has been supportive of the Senate initiatives to relax restrictive foreign ownership limitations on certain key investment areas. For instance, sir, papasalamat na kami sa Senate for passing the amendments of the Retail Trade Liberalization Act, the Foreign Investment Act, and the Public Service Act. Actually, sir,
Sir, maputol ko po kayo, sir, ha? Meron
Yes,
pong yung po sa Foreign Direct Investment Act, madami po ang nagre-react. Opo, kasi ang sinasabi, ito daw po ay questionable. Yung pong pagkakapasa po nun, although hindi ko po ito kinokontra, tandaan po ninyo, po ay kahit pagbalik-balik ta rin po ninyo ako, PDP laban po ako. Ako ay nasa wing ng kasama po ako dito sa sa act na to. Pero syempre, ako po ay nasa committee na ito na marami pong sektor ang nagsasabi na illegal ang pagkakapasa noong Foreign Direct Investment Act. Sapagkat ang nararapat lamang daw po na magdesisyon at magbigay ng interpretasyon sa saligang batas ay ang Supreme Court. Kasi ang nangyari po doon ay binigyan nila ng definisyon yung public utilities. Alam niyo man po siguro kung ano yung foreign direct investment, hindi po ba? Yun po ang kine-question. Wala daw pong karapatan ang Kongreso, ang legislative, na i-identify nila kung ano lang yung public utilities. Ang dapat lang daw po nun, ang meron lang daw pong dapat na nag-i-interpret nun ay ang Supreme Court. Gusto ko lang pong sabihin dito, kahit na meron tayong batas ngayon na existing, sa akin pong palagay, hindi po tama na sa ating pang nanggagaling yung mga question. Kasi meron pong question na ito ba ay pwedeng questionin sa Supreme Court. Alam nyo naman dito sa Pilipinas, laging ganyan. Pagka questionin ng isang tao, dadalhin sa Supreme Court. Kung ikaw, negosyante, foreign investor, papasok ka, meron kang dalang, may bagong batas na na pinirmahan ng ang 18th Congress, pinirmahan ng presidente nila. Okay na to. Pagdating ngayon sa iyo, sasabihin sa iyo ngayon may mga nagrereklamo. Sino ba yung mga nagrereklamo? Number 1, yung mga dating justice. Si Justice Carpio, sinabi niya illegal yun. Yung mga ibang professional na mga lawyers, sinabi nila illegal. So kung ikaw ngayon yung foreign investor, hindi ka siguro mahirapan ka maglagay ng mag-aalanganin ka. Kaya po ang tanong sa inyo po, Sir Bien Ganapin, ganda na po ng apelyido nyo, Ganapin. Opo. Pabor po ba kayo na amendahan natin mismo yung 60-40 yung saligang batas? Kasi ang sinasabi nila kasi walang karapatan ng Kongreso amendahan ng isang batas ang saligang batas. Hindi pwede yun. Kumbaga, sinasabi nila, hindi pwede. Sa ligang batas yan, aamendahan mo. Pag maamendahan mo sa ligang batas, kailangan dumaan ka doon sa tatlo. Con-con, con-as, o yung People's Initiative. Ngayon, kayo po, tatanungin ko po kayo, diretsahin nyo na po ko, Sir Ganapin. Makakatulong po ba na amendahan natin yung saligang batas?
Salamat po, sir, Your Honor. With regards po doon sa binabanggit niyo po kanina na yung batas ng Public Service Act. Public Service Act po 'yon, yung pinasa ng Kongreso nung this year lang po 'yun nung March. Ang ginawa lang po doon, Senator, is to define kung ano yung public utility as a separate from
Boss, yun nga yun, boss eh. Boss, yun nga yun. Yun nga ang point. Ang point natin, binubuksan natin kasi yung public service daw natin, public utility sa foreign. Di ba? Yun nga yun, boss eh. Yun nga yung point. Ang sinasabi nga ng mga dating justices, illegal. Illegal yung ginawa kasi dinefine ng Congress kung ano yung public utilities. Hindi nga daw po pwede yun. Yung Public Service Act, ano yan eh, ang mangyayari dyan, boss, mauuwi sa Supreme Court. Mauuwi yan sa Supreme Court. At ang sabi ng Supreme Court, sila lang ang may karapatan mag-define. Sila lang ang may karapatan mag-interpret ng saligang batas. So, ang simple lang po yung tanong ko, wag na po nating balikan yun kasi pag ang haba po tayo. Simpleng tanong, boss. Pabor po ba ang NEDA na amendahan yung 60-40? Yung hinihingi po ni Senator Gatchalian. Pabor po ba kayo na ito po ba'y makakatulong sa ekonomiya? Itong pag-aamenda ng saligang batas. Kalimutan na po natin yung sinasabi natin ng mga bagong batas. Kasi po, ang sinasabi nga ng karamihan, ito ay illegal. Hindi niyo po ako pwedeng sabihin na against ako dyan dahil galing po yung batas na yan doon sa aking presidente, ex-president. Kaya kung akong tatanungin niyo ako, pabor ako dyan sa batas na yan. Pero hindi, ang pinag-uusapan po natin ngayon ay ang katotohanan. Ano ba yung katotohanan? Kine-question ito. Kine-question. Ang lahat ng bagay na may question, pag dumating sa Supreme Court, alam mo, ako yung dayuhan, may pera ako, nag-invest na ako. Nandyan na, biglang dinesisyonan ng Supreme Court, illegal yung batas. Patay tayo dyan, boss. Yun ang inaano po natin. Ano po ba kayo? Pabor na amendahan, ang 60-40 na yan, o hindi? Yun lang po, boss.
Ayaw pa sagutin, ano?
The NEDA has no objection to departing from constitutional provision on foreign equity restriction. But of course, we leave such wisdom to Congress. We think that this will enable us to quickly step up in order to meet the requisites of modern economies. Thank you po.
Ayun, napakaganda po, sir. Yun lang po ang gusto namin madinig. Wala po kayong objection. Napakasarap pong madinig niyan, boss. Maraming salamat po, Sir Bien. Salamat po. Wag po kayong aalis, Sir Bien, ha. Marami po pong magaganap.
Salamat po.
Tatanungin ko lang po, meron po kayong, meron lang po akong itatanong kay Ma'am Shulita Monsod. Ma'am, gusto ko lang pong tanungin kung sa inyo po pang palagay, magkakaroon po ba ng magandang epekto kung atin pong aamendahan ang economic provision sa 1987 Constitution?
Ang stand ko po is that amending those constitutions are neither necessary nor sufficient to attract foreign direct investment. Hindi po necessary. Just the fact that, the economic provisions, the economic restrictive, economic provisions are 7, and the resolution now talks only about public utilities, advertising and media, means to say that, somehow or other, the other restrictive provisions have been taken care of without having to touch the Constitution. So that's what my presentation is all about. The economic provisions of the Constitution, the so-called restrictive. Amending that is neither necessary nor will amending it, bring in a flood of foreign direct investments, because there are other. If you will allow me to make my presentation, I will do it. But that's the crux of my point.
Okay po, pakinggan ko lang po si Secretary Michael Castillo.
Mr. Chair,
Okay, President.
there is no problem for an equity requirement on certain sectors of the economy, because that is a tool for regulation. But it doesn't have to be in the Constitution. It has to be given to Congress to determine which particular enterprise would require equity requirement. Because by keeping it in the Constitution, it limits the power of Congress to define policies and to enact policies that would in fact support economic progress. The fact that it is in the Constitution, it is a constraint there is no problem that in every enterprise, the Congress will define, okay, in this particular sector, it's 70-30. In this particular sector, it's 60-40. Then in another sector, it must be 51-49. There is nothing wrong with that. But if it is in the Constitution, I think it is limiting.
No, I am just saying that the limitations have not, the provisions have not either affected anybody. I will show you the studies that have been made, Philippine studies that have been made that show that, restrictiveness and the fact that, the resolutions talks about the Philippines is the most restrictive with respect to foreign direct investment. Hindi ba yan ang one of your whereas clauses ng resolution? Sabi ng resolution, the Philippines is the third most restrictive country in the world, and therefore that has prevented foreign direct investment from coming in. Well, I just wanted to point out that foreign direct investment restrictiveness index that has been going on from 1997, then it started again in 2003, then it's 2006, then 2010, all the way up. That restrictiveness index shows that 1997, 2003, 2006, 2010, all the way to 2014, the most restrictive country in the world with respect to foreign direct investment was China. And China received the largest amount. So restrictiveness does not make any difference if there's a profit to be made. All right? And then, so hindi lang ng China. Let's talk about the Philippines. The Philippines became number one in 2015, I think, and 2016. Basta after 2014, China ang number one. After 2015, the Philippines became number one. And yet, if you will look at the data, the most foreign investment we have gotten 16 and 17. In 18, it started to go down, and it is now going down. So I'm saying this restrictiveness, lifting the restrictiveness is not necessary. To all intents and purposes, for all intents and purposes, the door to foreign direct investment is open. They don't come in. And why don't they come in? It's not because of restrictiveness or not, because the Philippines most restrictive, so much money came in, right? So let's look at the evidence. Let's not just argue. Let's look at the evidence, because so many people have made studies on foreign direct investment and have made their conclusions on the basis of those empirical studies, not on the basis of arguments. Let's just look at the data, the hard evidence, and it will show you.
Sir Castillo?
Well, we have to look at two sides of the coin. One question is, does it limit? The other one is, does it benefit? Now, I have never found any study that would point to a conclusion that the 60-40 requirement in our constitution actually benefited the nation in terms of economic progress and in terms of our ability to, create jobs for our people. So it has to be two ways that we have to look into.
Secretary Carlos?
May I add to the continuing conversation here? While it is true that empirical evidence provided by Professor Monsod shows that the restriction for 60-40 may not be the predictor variable for inflow of foreign direct investment, there are other variables that in fact prevented or were obstacles to the coming in of foreign investment, and the level of corruption is one of them. And there are studies that will support this. So I agree with my colleague here and my former student also, Eric. You know, Robin, practically everybody in the room is my student if you've been teaching as long as I have. So yes, now we're really looking at context of empirical evidence. And that really occurs in the social science literature. Even in the natural science literature, this occurs. But I think we must see the preponderance of evidence, meaning which has, so I was saying, which has the most pluses that will pursue the argument that we were making earlier in the session. And not only that, we have to show remarkably and arguably that in fact the studies being compared are comparable. So there's no question about empirical evidence in regard to this. So we are not saying that the 60-40 is the predictor variable. There are other predictor variables for why foreign investment comes or does not come. Thank you.
Maraming salamat po. Ma'am, magpipresent po kayo? Sige po. Opo. Ma'am, makinig lang po tayo sandali sa presentation. Wag muna kayong aalis, ma'am.
I hope you don't mind, but I have a speaking engagement in another geography. So,
Gano'ng katagal po ito, ma'am? Yung...
to show you everything about it.
Sige po. Pwede po natin balikan po yan, ma'am, hanggang sa makaalis lang po si Secretary Carlos. Mag-move lang po kami ng konti, tapos pag alis po ni Secretary Carlos, then... Opo. Papadalan ko po kayo ng copy. Opo. Ituloy lang po natin hanggang 10 minutes po. 10 minutes, pwede? Opo. Meron lang po akong mga gustong... ma'am, sana po masagot niyo po ako tungkol po dito. Yung pong sa loob po ba ng halimbawa po halimbawa lang po. Yung parliamentary, balik po tayo sa parliamentary kasi kanina po sinasabi po ng ating propesora na nagkaroon din po talaga ng mga issue ng korupsyon, ng hindi pag-unlad itong mga parliamentary. Ito po bang mga bansa na ito ay totoong nag-parliamentary? Ito po bang mga bansang binanggit ng ating pong profesora? O ito po yung kwentong kutsero lang din na parliamentary?
Well, like democracies, parliamentary systems come in many, many permutations. So it is not as if, the parliamentary system would be like the House of Commons, because India is also parliamentary, Singapore, etc., because they have to deal with the political culture on the ground. So that means they change the configuration of the parliamentary system, but the principles that I articulated earlier, they're basic principles. In other words, you can't call yourself parliamentary if you don't have a fusion of executive, legislative. You don't have a right to oust the prime minister if he loses the majority. There are fundamental principles without which you don't label yourself parliamentary. That said, again, let me say that in the course of hypothesis testing, that is, you're trying to show the relationship between certain kinds of variables which are causing certain things and having an effect, then you have an array of variables there which differ in all the 200 economies and states. And while it is true that we can present evidence after evidence, empirical evidence, many of these conclusions are colliding, or if they are moving in the same direction, are talking about different issue areas. So I'm sorry to disappoint those of us who think that the social science can declare certain things. We cannot. In fact, if you will notice, most of my statements are tentative. They are likelihoods. Because in fact, my sentences will not end in a period. My sentences will end in an ellipsis. Because that's far. Because as a scholar, I can be corrected by another empirical evidence, which has harder evidence. But still, I argue, and it's not just based on argument, compelling arguments, but this will be based on empirical evidence, which I did not prepare for in terms of titles and authors. That is still, there are more pluses and minuses. There will be less corruption in a parliamentary system rather than in a presidential system. There will be less corruption in a federal system rather than in a unitary system, because the accountability of the ministers involved is closer to the ground. It's very easy to kick out a minister. By the way, there are two kinds of responsibility, senators, your honors. Individual responsibility and collective responsibility, which means that a minister can in fact be compelled to resign on the basis of behavior which is not acceptable. You remember, Eric, the Minister of Defense Profumo? Minister of Defense Profumo, Great Britain, was sleeping with, what's her name? I forgot. Another British woman. And the British woman was sleeping with a Soviet also, defense minister. So he got kicked out. Here, you notice he got kicked out as an individual minister. But you can have collective responsibility. That's why we have the principle of you sink or swim with the government of the day. That's the reason why I said earlier that the parliamentary system, in fact, engenders discipline in the political party, because you are going to sink if you do not toe the party line. So the individual and collective responsibility is one other hallmark of a parliamentary system. And that one is something which I think as a plus of the parliamentary system vis-a-vis the presidential. Thank you.
Salamat po. Meron pong isang tanong pa. Di ba po ang parliamentary, iba't iba din yan? Meron din siyang parang style ng Germany, may style ng UK. Ano po kaya ang nababagay sa, halimbawa lang po, sa Pilipinas, ano pong nababagay na parliamentary sa atin?
Siguro ang maganda nating kopyahin. Total, nangangopya-ngopya tayo. Kopyahin natin ang maganda. Siguro, Senator Robin, ano yung, sa Germany kasi yung constructive vote of non-confidence. Natandaan nyo si Angela Merkel stayed there for 16 years. Bakit 16 years siya? Kasi nga walang term limit, di ba? But because the CSU-CDU continued to control the Bundestag, no, for 16 years. But the only way to kick out Angela Merkel is for you to have another one to replace her. That's why it's called constructive vote of non-confidence. Hindi ka pwede mag-kick out ng premier or chancellor hanggang wala kang inilalagay in his or her place to be voted by the same absolute number of votes. So you will not have a constant rotation of governments of the day na, you know, willy-nilly, you just kick out the premier kasi ayaw mo yung pagmumukha niya or for whatever reason. No? You can only kick him out. And that is one thing that we should copy, by the way, when we draft a new constitution. Constructive vote of non-confidence.
German po, German. So doon pala tayo dapat pumunta, pare ko. Oo, Senator.
Well, Secretary Carlos mentioned Germany. Yung party list system yata natin, we tried to copy the German model, but we Filipinized it. And then, but I've heard mga reporters reporting on the German electoral system, and sabi nila, we need to be rocket scientists to understand their system. So, ingat-ingat lang tayo sa German model. Siguro maganda siguro sa broad strokes, siguro sa forma, pero even yung mga reporters hindi nila maintindihan how to compute the percentages of the parties controlling the parliament, the Bundestag, because of their party list system na they needed to be rocket scientists daw to understand the system. An outsider reporting on the German model.
With all due respect,
Opo.
Your Honors, I beg to disagree, absolutely. Next time you invite me, I want a blackboard, and I will discuss with you in very simple terms the mixed single member district system and the PR. You know, I have been invited 1,000 times to say something about the party list, which we really implemented in a very, very wrong way. I wasted my time, you know, attending committee hearings. That's the reason why you have a problem right now.
Sundo po tayo!
Hindi ho, ganyan talaga yung party list system. You have distorted it. You have distorted.
Pwede po bang malaman yung ibig niyong sabihin, Senator, ng Philippinize?
Ito, pagkaintindi ko kasi ng party list system, dugtong yun eh. Actually, the party list system, you are given supplemental number of votes to actually reflect the percentage of the votes that your party got. When the totality nationwide is being considered. Ganun ang pagkaintindi ko. Kunyari, if the party got 30% of the votes, and yet on the number of seats, hindi kayo 30%, dadagdagan kayo ngayon ng mga party list ninyo, listed by your party, so that the actual delegates will reflect really 30% of the votes that you got. So that's how I understand it, Secretary Carlos, but I may be mistaken.
You are
Sige po.
very correct. But siguro para mas madaling, kailangan kong pisara next time. But you are correct. It's not only the system of government that we're changing from presidential to parliamentary, but we're also changing concomitantly the electoral system. And I would recommend very strongly, Senator Padilla, that we incorporate this, where we incorporate a single member district and a PR system called the proportional representation. I hope the next time you invite me, I would need a pisara behind me, because it's easier to explain that rather than, explaining here to you. It's better to be understood. And yes, it is not rocket science.
Maraming salamat po, Secretary. Brother?
Senator, when you do studies of nations, you will see similar system with different performance. And you will see different systems with similar performance. So we will be asking ourselves, what accounts for the difference in performance between similar political systems? And what accounts for the difference of performance between similar system, and what accounts for similarities of performance between two different political system? The answer is the context. Systems operate at different contexts. That's why it's also dangerous when you compare two political system, yet you do not dig deeper into the context at which they are, they operate. Yeah. So of course there are so many factors to take into account. So that is just a caveat when we read studies, because what are presented as evidence are not really the exact evidence that we need to come up with a valid conclusion. Now, generally speaking, if we are going to amend our constitution, personally, I would suggest that if we are to amend our constitution, it must be designed in such a way that it is the political parties that would choose the candidates. Okay.
Pabor po kayo sa two-party system?
Well, not necessarily, but that one is actually a for a strong political party system, and it has to be a constitutional reform in such a way that it is the people doesn't elect candidate, rather the people elect the government. So those are key directions if we are going. Regardless of whether you want to do it parliament or federal, it has to be towards that direction. Now, if there is also amendment to the constitution, what I want to suggest is that to change the development orientation of our constitution, because the development orientation of our constitution is mainly land-based. And we have to recognize that the Philippines is an archipelago. So if you look at the development, we are doing development mostly on land. That's why we have congestion in traffic. But our marine space is underutilized. But remember, our marine space is not just a strategic addition to our resource base. It is in fact the primary source. But we are, the marine space, the marine assets are not being tapped. We have traffic because we do not use the water for our transportation. Now, so it's the development orientation that we have to come up with an archipelagic framework for development. Now, there is also problem with how we the principle of checks and balances, the separation of powers, has been reduced to a system of mistrust. Sabi nyo kanina, bago maka-attend yung isang in-invite ninyo, 3 layers ang approval bago siya maka-attend. Because our system is so designed that it is based on mistrust. That's why even a single check would require a document, would require 69 signatures before the check is signed by the one who is authorized to sign the check. So it is premised on mistrust. We have to look into that because it is embedded in our governance system, and we need to correct that problem. Now, on the 60-40, I think it is not necessary. What is important is stronger regulatory control. Now, my last point, Your Honor, is, and I have to beg your indulgence on this, you talk about difficulty in implementing our laws. In my 2 decades working as consultant in various government agencies and also as regular resource person in the House and in the Senate, what I have noticed is that most of our legislations are not properly abstracted. They are the ideas, they are not properly abstracted. What I mean by policy abstraction is that the different provisions of laws are supposed to be abstracted from the first to second to third and the fourth level of policy abstraction. The first level of policy abstraction is at the level of objectives, goals, principles, and ideology. Now, the second, but your objective must be supported by what we call policy lines. In the literature, we call it strategies. Okay, we call it strategies. Now, but your strategy is still broadly written. So it has to be supported by specific measures. And your measures must be supported by specific practices. Why am I discussing policy abstraction? Because when you look at Republic Act and implementing rules and regulations, they are copycat. They are copycat. And the reason why it also takes time for us to legislate, because we are putting too many details in our legislations and we debate every provision. So my common experience whenever I am asked to consolidate various bills or to refine a substitute bill is that a 26-page bill, you could always reduce it to 10. If properly abstracted, because the first and second level of policy abstraction must be in the RA. But the third and the fourth level of policy abstraction must be in the IRR. And we cannot make distinctions whenever we review a Republic Act and its implementing rules and regulation. And it's difficult to implement.
Ayos. Apo, meron lang po akong, boss?
Good theory, pero dapat pag-usapan na lang siguro natin yun na outside of the committee hearing kasi yung topic iba eh. But that's good in theory. Tingnan natin. But ako, I advocate, ayoko ng generalization lang na sa law because I've seen the abuse sa IRR eh. These are unelected people, feeling like they are the legislators. They change the meaning of the law, the objective of the law. Kaya sabi ko, if we can put some details in the law, I'm an advocate because of the Philippine experience. That may be applicable sa ibang bansa, but in the Philippine experience, as of the moment, di ko naman din pinutuldukan, as of the moment, if there are some important details, put them in the law. Kasi these unelected drafters of the IRR, they feel like they are the third chamber, they amend the law.
I agree, Mr. Chairman, I agree. Mr. Chairman, I even delivered a privileged speech during the last Congress relative
Yun.
to unauthorized IRRs. So the finer details of legal crafting, including the general principles, leave that to the legislators, leave that to the legislative intent. And the IRRs should just jive in for the details that are lacking, and it has to be again subject to a legislative oversight. So these are details. Tama, Senator Pimentel, leave that to the Congress. That's what our job is.
Yan.
Honor, may
Maraming salamat po, Senator Tolentino, Senator Pimentel. Maraming salamat po, Secretary.
Yes, I beg the indulgence of the whole body, including your honors, because I really have to run or I'll be late for my next speaking engagement. But maybe just a quick repartee to what Eric just said. Let us not put political party system in the Constitution. It can be one party, multi-party, two-party. It will depend on the dynamics of the system. Wag nating ilalagay sa Constitution yung kanyang type. So thank you very much, Your Honors, for inviting me, and I hope you'll invite me next time.
Opo, ma'am. Pagbalik niyo po, meron na po tayo dyan blackboard. Opo, whiteboard. Kahit anong gusto niyong board. Pansamantala po, suspend lang muna natin sandali. 1 minute. Sandali lang po.
Ayun guys, suspended daw muna. Ha? So, pagkatapos po nitong live natin dito sa Senate, mga 12:30 po, eksaktong 12:30, mag-start po tayo ng live. Patungkol po doon sa itong mga kaparian natin kinampihan si Senator Loren Legarda at ang ating VP na si Inday Sara hindi na din nakatiis. Nagsalita na din tungkol doon sa sinabi ni Senator Loren Legarda, kaya mainit-init po itong mga tatalakayin natin. So pag nag-out po tayo dito sa live na to, 12:30 po, ire-relive ulit natin. Okay? Ire-relive po natin ulit, okay? So lipat lang po kayo dito pa din sa channel na to. Hintayin lang natin bumalik sila 1 minute lang daw. Ewan ko kung totoo to kasi yung nung nakaraan na sinabi nila ilan ba yun? Parang 10 minutes lang yata. Umabot ng 2 oras. Hanggang hindi na sila nakabalik. So, eto, tingnan natin kung yung 1 minute na sinasabi ni Senator Binoy, kung totoo, ano? Pero, tawag dito, mas mainit po yung second live natin. Kinolekta ko lang po yung mga pictures na gagamitin natin na patunay na yung mga sinabi nila Inday Sara, Senator Bato, nagsalita na din tungkol dyan. Si Pastor Kibuloy, nagsalita na din po tungkol dyan. Yan po yung mga tatalakayin natin mamaya after nitong live na to. After nitong committee hearing nito sa Blue Ribbon Committee, okay? So, tagal nila. May 1 minute na ba? Napaasa na naman yata tayo. Nagwiwi muna yata. Nagwiwi. Hintayin lang natin mga kapatid, ha? Sabi ko, hindi pa ako readyng magsalita Tapos biglang nagwiwi yata tong si Senator Binoy. Anyway, shoutout muna po tayo dun sa mga manonood po na nanonood dito sa ating channel. Shoutout po kay Sir Nyor Junior TV, kay Skylar, Summer, na si Gavi, na busy po yan Habang nakikinig po sa atin, nagtatrabaho po yan. Nandyan din po si Ma'am Lynn Garcia, si Tito Jet Ramos, hindi ko pa nakita Nandyan si Casey Net, o yan, dinugo yung ilong ko. Mukhang ano, mukhang itong 1 minute nila, hindi yata hindi yata matutupad So guys, eksaktong 12:30 po, magre-relive po ulit tayo para po doon sa, yun nga, yung sinasabi natin na yung mga kaparian, kinampihan si Senator Loren Legarda, si BP Sara, may nasabi na din sa sinasabi ni Senator Loren Legarda. Si Senator Bato, nagsalita na din. Si Pastor Kibuloy, nagsalita na din. Lahat po to, bukod dun sa pare, against po doon sa sinabi at pagkampi at pagpupush ni Senator Loren Legarda sa peace talk. Okay? So kung bago natin to i-off itong unang live natin, ulitin ko po, 12:30 po naka-relive tayo para po pag-usapan yung mga yon. So kung bago pa lang kayo dito sa ating channel, don't forget to subscribe, like, and please press the notification bell po, okay? Ipapahinga ko lang to sandali and kita-kita po ulit tayo 12:30. So 24 minutes lang na pahinga pala, no? Paalam po muna.